So sunlight exposure in the evening can also optimize your brain. So one of the things that you can do is, hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be reviewing a podcast I listened to by Dr. Andrew Huberman called Optimise Your Brain with Science-Based Tools. Dr. Andrew Huberman is a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at the Stanford School of Medicine. His podcast focuses on how our brain and its connections with the organs of our body control our perceptions, our behaviours, and our health. It also discusses existing and emerging tools for measuring and changing how our nervous system works. So I'll be summarising some key takeaways from the podcast, such as early sunlight exposure in the morning, delaying caffeine intake in the morning, alertness, evening sunlight exposure, and sleep cycles overall. Finally, I'll then end by giving you my overall opinion of the podcast. Hope you enjoy. So how can you use sunlight exposure to optimize your brain? Well, as Dr. Huberman explains in the podcast, it's one of the first things that you should do when you wake up in the morning. So the reason why you should do this is because we have these cells in our eyes called melanopsin cells, and their function is to detect sunlight and essentially prompt a feeling of wakefulness. And the really cool thing about these cells is that they actually help to regulate our circadian rhythm on a 24-hour basis. So what this means is after just a few days of continually exposing your eyes to sunlight first thing when you wake up, what you're actually doing is reconstructing your circadian rhythm. And this works because the melanopsin cells in your eyes are actually starting to develop a stronger anticipation for that sunlight at that particular time. Therefore, you will actually start to feel more awake at that same time, even without that sunlight exposure. So one of the other key takeaways that I thought was really cool is why you should delay your caffeine intake for at least 2 hours. And I know for most uni students that probably sounds like a nightmare, but hear me out. To understand this, we kind of need to understand what makes you feel sleepy in the first place. So it's a buildup of a molecule called adenosine that binds to its receptors on the brain that makes you feel sleepy. So what caffeine does is it will actually bind to those adenosine receptors in the brain and thereby actually block the effects of adenosine. But it's crucial to understand that even though the effects of adenosine are being blocked because it can't bind to its receptors, there is still going to be a buildup of those same adenosine molecules. So once caffeine is eliminated from the body, then those adenosine molecules that have started to build up are now free to bind to those receptors again. And this is what causes that post-caffeine crash that everyone talks about. When you're in a caffeinated state, you're actually inhibiting your body's natural circuitry of waking yourself up, which typically occurs at about 1 hour to 2 hours post waking up. So it's your body's natural release of cortisol, which makes you feel wakeful. So by delaying caffeine intake, you're reinforcing and potentiating the natural circuitry that exists between the brain and the adrenal release of cortisol. Now I want to discuss different states that you might find your brain in, such as a very alert state or a very relaxed state, and how you can take advantage of that. State of high alertness is really good for strategy implementation, more so like linear activities, things that you already know what you need to do and it's just a matter of doing them. And this state usually occurs about mid-morning for most people, and according to Dr. Huberman, apparently about 3 hours post waking up. However, it is important to consider that we do have periods of time where we are too alert, and that might be crucial to eliminate certain distractions, because all of a sudden in that state of mind everything becomes a stimulus. So say for example, if you're like me and you like to listen to music while studying, if you're in a very high alert state, it might be best to eliminate music, because that will only be a distraction in that particular state of mind. So then we have those states of very clear, calm and focused states of mind, and these are ideal for hard bouts of learning, and this is because we have a great ability in these states to suppress distractions. So Dr. Huberman talks about 90-minute bouts of learning. I typically opt for about 30 to 45 minutes myself, but everyone's a little bit different in that kind of state of mind. And it's crucial because once you get to about 60 to 90 minutes of that ultradian cycle, you start to become a little bit more mentally fatigued, and so it's important to give yourself a little bit of a mental break there. So according to Dr. Huberman, there are a few things that you can do throughout your day to improve or to manipulate some of those states of high alertness. So one of the things would be a morning workout within the first hour of waking up, and what this is going to do is increase your body's natural release of epinephrine and therefore put you in more of a higher state of alertness. In addition to this, a fasted state, meaning a restriction of food, will actually also lend itself to a higher level of alertness too. So the way I might use this in my own personal life is if I have an exam in the morning, I will typically just fast overnight and then won't eat anything for breakfast because I just feel like I have a higher level of mental alertness going into an exam. On the contrary, where we are more relaxed and sleepy, this is a great time to start doing more creative tasks. And this is because we are in a more creative state of mind where we will be better at intertwining pre-established ideas. So for most people, this occurs late to mid-afternoon, and that's where you might say, for example, start journaling or start thinking about how you can approach something in a different way. So sunlight exposure in the evening can also optimize your brain. So one of the things that you can do is view sunlight or artificial light, as this is going to help regulate our circadian rhythm as well. It's going to ensure that we're not waking too early in the morning. But in addition to that, it's also going to promote a better night's sleep. So Dr. Huberman talks about how you should limit all light exposure from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. on a regular basis. In addition to that, he's also spoken about in another podcast how it's beneficial to view the sunset of an evening because this promotes the natural release of melatonin and therefore facilitates a better night of sleep. So this leads me on to the last key takeaway, and that is of natural sleep cycles. So Dr. Huberman puts forth the argument that it is within our natural biology to wake upon sunrise and sleep upon sunset. This is backed up by a study that he references by the University of Colorado, where they took subjects out into the wilderness and they essentially had them use no artificial light whatsoever. And one of the crucial things here was the study found that the subjects actually started to naturally wake up at sunrise and fall asleep just after sunset. And the subjects were then brought back to their natural everyday lives, and they still continued on with this habit of waking up with the sunrise and falling asleep around sunset. And Dr. Huberman talks about how when we say midnight, we're actually supposed to be referring to the middle of the night, as opposed to when most of us in modern day society say, oh, it's midnight, I should go to bed. So there's some food for thought. So in conclusion, it was a great podcast, and Dr. Huberman backs up everything he talks about with scientific literature, which I'm all about. There's lots of very useful tools discussing everything from exercise, sleeping habits, and how to take advantage of different mental states. And for me personally, I will definitely be implementing some of the tools that he mentioned, especially around exercise and sleep, and trying to regulate those a little bit more. And finally, I highly recommend his podcast overall. Typically what he'll do is devote a whole month to a certain subject. So one month he might focus on sleep, another month he'll focus on muscle building. Overall, it's a great podcast. In this episode, there was a lot of key takeaways for me as well. Thanks, guys.